Now we're going to start. Now it's it. This is now the event is now starting. I declare the event started. This is it. Thank you, whoopers. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to this. It's so exciting to be here and to see all of you guys here. In a minute, I'll bring up David, but before I do that, I just want to kind of give you a little bit of background and explain what's going on here and what this thing is. And also, you're like, oh, sure, I'm going to introduce David, but you're like, who's going to introduce that guy? The answer is me. I'm going to introduce me. My name is Misha Glouberman. I'm going to be the host of this thing. Some people here know who I am, some people don't. I do a couple things in town, I guess, that I'm most known for. One is that I'm the host of something called the Trampoline Hall Lecture Series. And that's like a non-expert barroom lecture series that we've been doing pretty much since the dawn of time over at the Garrison up the street that was invented by my friend Sheila Hetty. That's one set of things that I do. Another set of things that I do is I teach a class called How to Talk to People About Things. And it's a class that's about communication skills. It teaches people how to talk about tough issues and how to deal with conflict, how to handle hard relationships, come to agreements, do negotiation, that kind of stuff. And I do it with, I teach that to just people. People come and show up and take the class. A lot of those people are actually here. So if you're curious about the class, you could ask one of them about it afterwards. You might be like, how would I know who that person is? And the answer is, they're amazing communicators. So if you hang around after the show and you see someone just like resolve a conflict like that in the bar, it's because they took my class. I take full credit, so ask them. A lot of those folks are here. So I teach it to people, and I also teach it to organizations, which it turns out are just made of people. So that's also, I work with organizations, I help groups and teams get better, all this kind of stuff. So that's the basic thing. That's stuff I've done in the past. What I'm doing here is something new, which in some ways, I guess, kind of combines the two things I've done in the past in a way, because Trampoline Hall is like a speaking series, which this is, and then How to Talk to People About Things is about a specific set of interests, which I want to address here. So this is the start of the How to Talk to People About Things conversation series. It is the very first inaugural event in that series. It remains to be seen whether it's the last event in the series or not. We're not sure. We're still kind of experimenting. But if this one goes well, we'll do another one. And the idea behind this series basically is that I want to bring in amazing people who do work that feels connected to the work that I do and how to talk to people about things. I want to bring in these amazing people, and I want to get to have conversations with them and share their amazingness with you. And our very first guest, the inaugural guest in the inaugural event of this possibly very brief or possibly incredibly long-going series is David McRaney. I've been a huge fan of his work for a really, really long time. He has a blog and a book and a podcast, which he just calls all of them "You Are Not So Smart." It's a really great title, so you can use it for lots of stuff. It's called "You Are Not So Smart," and it's great. Some of you probably know his work, and some of you don't. If you don't, you should, and if you should, you will, because you're here tonight. And it's amazing work. It's all about how we get sort of trapped inside of our own viewpoints, about how we're tricked by our blind spots and our limitations, and also about like how certain we are that that's not happening. So it's both about all the stuff we don't know and how sure we are that we know the stuff that we don't know. And for someone like me who's interested in how people struggle to understand each other's points of view, it's just delicious. It's so good. So he's been doing that for a long time, and he has a new book coming out that's about how people change their minds. And that's also really complicated because there's so much evidence about that basically people don't change their minds, that all the ways in which our beliefs are so stubborn and just resist attempts at changes. So part of the book's about that, and then part of the book is about what does happen in the incredibly rare and amazing moments when people actually do change their minds, and research about what actually happens there and how that happens. So it's really fantastic. His work's great, his blog's great, his books are great, his podcast is amazing. It's crazy that someone can be that good at that many things. So he can both sort of take all this information and present it in ways that are really fascinating and really interesting and really engaging. And the material, I think, is also really, really important. So I was like, we got to get this guy, and so we did. To my amazement, we got him here. We brought him here from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which you may not know is not super close to Toronto. But we brought him up all the way here, and you're like, oh, was he just passing through town? No. We brought him from there to here just to be here with you tonight. And you're like, well, that's amazing. Where is he? And he's right over there. So he used to be really far, and now he's just like a few feet away. And so I'm going to introduce you, ladies and gentlemen. Please, a very warm round of applause for David McRaney. How's everything in the back of the room? How are things over there?
So toasty and warm.
Good. How are you? So I'm so glad that you're here.
I am too.
Thank you so much for coming. How are you? You've been in Toronto for a few days.
Yeah.
How are you? How are you liking it?
I love it. I try to, every time I go to a new city, I'm like, well, how do I anthropomorphize it or like put it in some weird context? I feel like it's the vibe here is brunch with dogs.
Brunch with dogs?
Yeah. That's
you mean like brunch but with dogs instead of people?
Like,
or
if brunch with the dogs was like a magical spell instantiated into a living being, and then like it retired and became a city.
So it's brunch with dogs. Okay. All right. It's a brunch with dogs. All right. So there you go.
Yeah.
I'm glad to know that. Thanks.
Which I like. I'm saying that's good. I like it.
Is brunch with dogs a thing? Is there a thing that's called brunch?
That could be a business. We could start that tonight if there's any venture capitalists here.
Is it like no? When you say brunch with dogs, is there like a TV show called that I don't know about, or is that just like a concept?
Hold on. I have to make a phone call. That's good.
All right. Well, we could probably have the town slogan changed.
Is there a slogan already?
There isn't actually. They're just waiting around for one.
Get on it, people.
So now it's going to be brunch with dogs. Great. So I had an idea for how I want to kind of do this event, and you and I talked about this a bit, but all these guys are here too. So we also had to talk about whether we were going to look at those guys or not. So for now, let's
wait. Let me do this real quick.
What do you got? Oh, you, yeah.
Let me see you.
He's a blogger and he has a podcast, so he's really good at social media.
Do weird stuff. Okay. All right. The world will look at you. When this is over, I will send that to the world.
So the way that we thought that we'd do the talk is that I want to talk about, David has a new book coming up, and he also has all this other kind of work. And so the way I want to structure the talk, I think, is we'll talk about the book, but I kind of want to talk about it in the context of all of your other work. So We'll talk a bit about that, and then we'll just talk about some random stuff that I want to talk about.
Random's good, yeah.
And then the other thing that we'll do is we'll probably take at least a few questions from you guys along the way. We'll take some at the end, and depending on how things are going, we may stop in the middle and take a couple. Somewhere along the way, I will probably give you some instructions on what we're looking for in questions, because that's kind of my thing. But so just think about that. So what I wanted to talk about first, I guess, was I was thinking about the book. So the book's about how people change their minds.
Mm-hmm. And don't.
And don't, how people do and don't change their minds, right? And it's coming out now. When is it coming out?
Oh God, it's probably going to come out in about 8 to 10 months. It's
8 to 10
it's
months.
a whole thing. It was going to come out 4 days ago. It's a whole thing.
So so they changed their minds.
They changed their minds.
Then we know how your publisher changed their mind.
Yeah.
So when we started planning this event, the book was going to come out now.
Yeah.
So now you're getting an extra super sneak preview of a book that's
something that happens tonight could go in the book.
Oh, that's
it's
exciting.
Totally possible. Something will happen here. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's very exciting to think about. Okay, so there you go. So that could still happen. So the thing that I'm curious about is it seems to me that the book, from what I understand, is that part of it is setting up this idea. It's about how people change their minds, given how hard it is for them to change their minds. And I guess for me, I'm when I think about how hard it is for people to change their minds, and I was thinking what are the reasons for that? And I'm the reasons for that are everything that you've talked about for the past several years. It's all 120 episodes of your podcast and both of your two previous books. It's all of You Are Not So Smart. It's kind of about that. And so I wanted to kind of lay the groundwork for that a bit. And I was thinking about some of the concepts and stuff that you had around that. And the concept and you can tell me if this feels totally off base, but the concept that to me really captured all of it is that concept of the naive realism. That to me feels it's so much at the center of that. Do you want to tell me? Does that make sense? It's
So naive realism, if you've never heard this term, it's the notion that, and this is something that has been around in philosophy, I guess, for a while, but psychologists in the 1970s quantified it and did a lot of research to prove that it's a thing and put numbers behind it. But it's just the idea that if you believe you're right, you believe that you're right because of the things that you've seen and the things that you've read and the conversations you've had. And so when someone believes differently than you, that's just because they haven't read the things that you've read or seen the things that you've seen or talked to the people you've talked to. And so all they need to do is read the things you read and talk to the people you talked to. And so it feels just so natural to say, hey, look at this. Hey, look at this. And then when they look at it and they go, you think not, okay, they're a different person, they come from a different perspective. You just think that they've been corrupted in some way, that they have, that someone is influencing them, that they are, maybe they're watching the wrong channel, maybe that they're their religion is behind. There's always a reason why they can't come across, because they should.
Right, because the world's just as it looks to us. It's like I can just see that guy's the wrong guy's the wrong candidate. I can just see the things that's the wrong course of action. If people don't see it, it's just because they've misunderstood.
Yeah. So your intuition, your gut reaction, the first thing everyone does when they try to change someone's mind is use the things that would change their mind, or things that convinced them in the past. And when you get frustrated that doesn't work, you think, well, that person's unreachable. That person's, just obstinate. That person is a lost cause, and I shouldn't even try anymore. But it's like, actually, in the new book, I write that it's like trying to get to the moon with a ladder, and when it doesn't work, you think the moon is unreachable. And but it's just because you're using the wrong tools, and the right tools are not they're just not intuitive to us. And it just seems like they should come right across the table as soon as you. And this is why when you get into an argument on Facebook, I know you've done this. I do this. I've done this many times. You're like, okay, link, bullet point, and they're like, well, here are my links. Link. And for some reason, you can't. I don't know why we don't make this connection. Their links don't work on us, right? But we don't think we're both doing the same thing. We think that they're the polluted party.
Right, and so it's always them, right? Like it's always somehow that's that idea of like, oh, I just see the world as it is, and that's that sort of realism part.
What's crazy about naive realism is it leads to this thing that's very old, called the information deficit model.
Right.
And the information deficit model, I'm going to use a lot of these kind of terms. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think this is an audience. This is not an audience that's going to be afraid of you using some terms. Are you guys okay with terms? All right, people are nodding. Yeah, they're all like, they love terms.
I will immediately hit them with a hammer and we'll break them open and get the candy out. So the information deficit model, it's great because it's one of those things that comes up over and over again. Like the 19th century philosophers said, with public education, all superstitions will die. So they were certain that would be how every weird, witchcraft and everything, all it would take is educating people. Right. And Benjamin Franklin thought that all we have to do is make public libraries, and then every American farmer will be as educated as the aristocracy, and there will be no more problems in America. There will be everyone will agree on everything because everyone will have all the facts, and so they will all agree. So it's just naive realism kind of elevated, right? And even Timothy Leary, like the cyberpunks, they thought when the internet arrives, and this is my favorite one, right? As soon as everyone has the internet, they will all agree.
So Timothy Leary was wrong about something?
And all those people from that era, they thought when the information gatekeepers were put aside and everyone had the ability to put their own information in their minds, they actually called it power to the pupil, which I thought was great.
Power to the pupil?
Instead of power to the people, it'd be power to the pupil. Each individual will be able to decide what goes inside his or her head.
Right.
And they thought that it's naive realism magnified. They thought, so when they have access to the things that we have access to, they will all agree with us, and we will have the perfect democracy. And this is such an old idea, but it goes back to the founders of the United States. It was in everything. Yeah. Information deficit model. And in science communication, where I come from, that's still there. That's still like the first notion, is that all we have to do is give people access to education, and there will be no more strife, no more disagreement. Because how could they be? And for some reason, it gets lost in all that people are different and people have different motivations. People are not motivated by accuracy. That's the thing. That
seems to me like the thing that seems to me that just comes up again and again and again. That the insight is like we think of our minds as these like things that are built to accurately perceive and understand the world, but that's not what they're optimized for, right?
No, of course not. Confirmation bias, everyone's heard this term at this point. They used to be a thing I get to talk about, and people are like, what's that? But now everyone knows it, which is good.
Confirmation bias is really big now.
Yeah, it's good that everyone knows what it is. It's often framed kind of weirdly. I think it's mistaken for another phenomenon where when you buy a new car, you see that car everywhere all of a sudden, or we have a baby, all of a sudden everybody has a baby. That's not confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when I'm sorry, I'm telling you what you already know, but that's confirmation bias. Perfect. Yes, true. It's when it's very primal, and you have a hypothesis about, you see something happen in the natural world, you have a hunch as to why it happened, right. And then you go looking for examples of your hunch to prove that you were correct all along. That seems bad. It seems maladaptive, but it's highly adaptive if you think in terms of the long evolutionary history of our species, or the long time that we've been on the planet. once you learn sort of what to look for when it comes to like a predator, when you know kind of the environment that would have like a tiger in it, it's good to go expecting the tiger be there. So it's good to try to proceed from confirmation.
Right.
But that's not good when you're like running a country or a business
right.
or anything in modern life. So you should proceed.
So it's really just tigers.
Right.
It's not even other
totally
predators.
Is.
It's specifically just tigers.
Yeah, mainly so, yeah. And so it's adaptive in the tooth and nail environment and maladaptive in our environment. So you proceed. That's why we invented science. Science is just a tool for disconfirmation to get past our natural default response to the world.
And then it feels to me like, oh, that confirmation bias, and it's one of the things that I learned from listening to your podcast over the years, is like just how confirmation bias is like one of like dozens and dozens and dozens of things like that, where you start to see.
I think there are 280 now, 280 like quantified cognitive biases. Yeah.
280 quantified. It's so depressing.
It's not depressing. This gives me this. I love this. This actually is a source of hope for me.
Well, that raises a question I want to ask you, which is like how because to me, like so much of what I get. I'm curious what it's like for you. I guess that's right. I'm curious what it's like for you. Like I look at you and I'm like, okay, you've spent like a lot of years just really thinking about all the ways in which the ways that people's beliefs are formed isn't the sort of rational, reasonable thing that we sort of think about ourselves. But it's actually like this really weird and twisted thing where we have all these biases and we use all these heuristics and we engage in all these fallacies and stuff like that. And I'm curious how that affects you. Like, do you think that you're better?
No. I procrastinated right up until 15 minutes ago. So no. And no, of course, that's people ask that a lot. I think they think there are people who think they get these books and they sort of absorb all the stuff that I write about and they will become superhuman. There's even a fallacy for that called the G.I. Joe fallacy. Have you ever? I don't know if.
Wait, the G.I. Joe fallacy is what? That if you read a lot of books, you'll get.
The G.I. Joe fallacy, at the end of every G.I. Joe episode, they had the little PSA where they would be like, hey kids, don't sleep in refrigerators that you find in the garbage. Don't do that. And there would be a kid in the refrigerator and like a soldier would get him out and he's like, don't sleep in refrigerators. And he's like, thank you. And he goes, and now you know, and knowing is half the battle. And G.I. Joe, yes. Yes, right. I love that, right? And the G.I. Joe fallacy is knowing that half the battle is not half the battle. So like once you know this stuff, it does not protect you from it. In fact, it makes you more susceptible to it because now you think you're above it.
Whoa, oh no. Oh no. So, I take back this whole event. So
and you can see that like any like celebrity scientist is like constantly committing this stuff, even the ones that study this stuff, right?
Yeah, that's right. We were talking about that. Yeah, they're like, so because they become smart, they start to think even more that they're smart about stuff that they don't know anything about.
Yeah, and you know, Google plus confirmation bias. I mean, that's it, right? It's like, imagine confirmation bias is an invasive species, right. And you know, it never had an environment where it could proliferate. You give it Google plus the internet plus social strife and political strife, and it's like a frog that you'll never be able to get out of your swamp.
So you think that's why? So you think that's why it's like such a big? Why
Absolutely.
It's popular now?
But I do think that I do believe we will develop a literacy for it. We're already developing a literacy for it. Just 5 years ago, I would have said that, and I would say half the audience would have no idea what it is, and now everyone knows what it is, just at a base level. So.
Which, as we know, is going to make it worse.
for a bit.
But then I'm curious about that too, because you said like you have hope. And I'm curious why it gives you hope, why all this stuff gives you hope.
Because I think my culture, specifically in the United States, and Southern culture more so, and Western culture in general, it has a chip on its shoulder. It's very individualistic, and right. There's a distance between your baseline and humility, and I think that there's a real unity in humility. And once you start to be able to not take yourself seriously at a deep level, at a scientific, psychological level. That's unifying, and that there's the unity in the humility. I think gives me hope. I think we're a better species for it.
And is there like a gap between that that abstract humility versus? Because I guess what I'm trying to sort out is that part of what you're saying is like, oh, knowing this stuff makes you worse. But does it also like instill humility as it does?
I think it does. I think that's where you get to. If there's like a, you have to go through denial and pleading. You have to go through all the stages. But I think once you've really read a couple books on it, or just seeped yourself in it, you're better for it. But at first, you feel like you're going to be the guy that's like, oh, let me tell you what you're doing right now, which I've made a living out of.
There's that one thing, there's that thing you talk about, and now I forget who came up with it. I don't know if anyone knows who came up with it, but that thing about the thought experiment about, like, are you right about everything? Like the question about, like...
Oh, yeah, that's my friend Will Storr.
Is that Will? I love
some
that thing.
Some of you may be familiar with Will Storr. He wrote a great book called The Unpersuadables. It's called The Heretics in Australia, but when it came over here, they called it The Unpersuadables. And he actually, like, a lot of my conversations with him were inspirational for the new book, because his mission was to just interview people who were very fringy and just see why they were unpersuadable. And he had this great thought experiment in the beginning of the book, which was, do you think you're, well, you can just do this right now. We'll do it as a group.
Yeah.
And I want you to answer me, okay? Do you think you're right about everything? No. So what are you wrong about?
But name one.
And that's it, right? Like that's a great thought experiment, because if we can agree we're not right about everything, so we must be wrong about something. What are we wrong about? I have no idea. Why aren't we pursuing that? Why aren't we trying to figure it out?
Yeah, and then you work at the thing. That kept rattling in my head. Like I kept thinking, well, okay, so I'm wrong about some things, but then you're like, okay, but what about so I'm wrong, but I can't think of things I'm wrong about, and then I'm like. Oh, he had this other line. He had this other line where he was like, the way he disproves that you can't be right about anything, it's not just humility. Like what he says is, he says, people disagree about things. So if you were right about everything, you'd be a very special person, because it would mean everybody else in the world is wrong about at least some things. You would basically be the one person in the world who's right about everything, which is it's not just like a sort of high thing to think about yourself. It's almost mathematically impossible.
Yeah, I think that's why cult leaders think they're Jesus, right?
Yeah, you're like, I'm the one person.
Naturally, who would be right about everything? Oh, Jesus, I'm Jesus.
Yeah.
This makes total sense.
yeah, that's the only explanation. Right? And I started thinking about it, and like for me, I could sort of be like, oh, I could be wrong about some things, but I was like, well, not about the things there's some things I feel really strongly about. I couldn't be wrong about those. But the same experiment still works. You think, well, there's other people who disagree with me. Might it be am I the one person who's just right about all those things, the things we really care about? And even then, it doesn't matter. The things that I feel great conviction and passion about. So it's not just like trivial stuff. It's like, oh, even the things that I care the most about at the core of my being, if there's other people who disagree with them, it's almost impossible that I'm right about all of them.
And that's why the scientific method is unnatural. I mean, it's a tool for getting past the way we naturally think. Right. And when you have a hunch, instead of looking for confirmation, you look for disconfirmation first, and that's just not what we do. It's just not how we're made. It would be very maladaptive to be that way. But oddly enough, by using that tool, we got to the moon. We were able to cure diseases just by doing that one thing. We were still confirming things. They were sacrificing virgins for the crops, and they were curing, a fever with a knife. And then as soon as we added disconfirmation in the mix, that stuff started to fade out very quickly.
Right, so just the idea of having like a mechanism for disconfirmation that like takes it out of your head, that's just not like, oh, it does not feel right to me, kind of thing, but like making it external, having a process.
But it's still a problem. Like, science has to police itself very strongly. Right now we're going through a replication crisis, especially in the social sciences. A lot of the topics I've covered, I've had to recover because the next batch of scientists, they realized, well, they were committing confirmation bias when they were studying these other things.
Such a wild thing, like the very scientists who are studying these cognitive errors are making those same cognitive errors in the studies.
Once they're invested, once they're getting book deals and speaking engagements for their ideas, they become vested, and now they're committing primal biological primate stuff. Yeah.
And that seems like the thing that's so powerful for me in all this stuff that you talk about is the idea that that's not something that's broken. Like, it's not something that bad people do, or like all those mistakes. They're not things that bad people do, or that dummies do, or that weak people do. They're things that absolutely they're not even the exception to the rule. They're almost more the rule. That like what we do is we form these beliefs, for self-serving reasons, or for tribal reasons, or for all these reasons. Then sort of after the fact, we build up these scaffoldings to try to defend them.
Yeah, it goes back.
But that's the normal.
Yeah, we're not motivated by accuracy. I mean, fact-based people are people who've been trained to think that way. Journalists and academics and scientists and historians. People who live in fact-based worlds are the ones who become the most, I think, frustrated when the facts don't work on people, because that's like number one rule in the new book. Facts don't work on people. They don't work the way you think they work. The way I phrase is it too early to say this? I don't know.
Yeah, no, let's start. Let's go.
So, I think our intuition is that we. Everybody does this until you're enlightened, and then you think you're smarter than everybody. You think that we think that our beliefs. It's sort of like we all think we're Gandalf, and we went down into the bowels of our library, and we studied and we looked, and we were like, okay, this is true, and now I have beliefs,
right.
And those beliefs those beliefs make sense, and we form attitudes based out of a collection of beliefs that make sense to us, and those attitudes then lead to our values, and those values collectively create norms, and those norms create culture, and then culture exerts normative influence over our entire populace. And it works exactly the other way around, right? So normative influence is what creates a cultural sort of a collection of cultural ideas creates normative influence creates values create attitudes to support the values, and right. Then we form load-bearing beliefs that will then hold up the values, and then we look for facts by cherry-picking the evidence to support the beliefs. And so it's not that facts don't work on people. If you think of that like a digestive system of opinion, it's just that we keep trying to feed people facts up the wrong end of the digestive system. Because
it's a really upsetting metaphor. Thank you.
And because when you engage someone who's got a really strongly held belief,
right.
Or an attitude, and that's another thing we can talk about, that those are different, and we didn't know that until like 70 years ago. That's crazy. But that you, when you fight somebody, you engage in something I call belief whack-a-mole. So you're never really arguing the thing you think you're arguing about. You're arguing their justifications. And you can almost think of it like, there's the belief right here, and it's got this corona, this protective shell of justifications that are made of these fungible, disposable beliefs. They can die. And that's what you're arguing. You kill one, they'll just put another one up to create it. So you end up just having an argument over justifications. You never get to what you're talking about.
Right.
And so the most powerful persuasive techniques that I came across in writing the book were the ones that figured out a way to bypass that process, not engage in belief whack-a-mole.
So that was one thing. So that maybe that's where we start to talk about. So we sort of set up this framing of like why we would expect. Because it's funny why we would expect it to be hard for people to change their minds. And then what you say is you started to go out and start to find places where people could. And I guess for this book, one thing I want to say about the book is like it's a change for you, I think, in a couple ways. Like in terms of the content, it feels like so much of everything that you do that leads up to the book is kind of about the idea that like you just can't change
Absolutely.
people's minds.
That was one of the inciting moments, yeah.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, we can.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that's really different about the book is just in terms of, just as someone who's followed your own work, that's really exciting, is that up until this point, it feels like in your work, what you've done is you've mostly been like someone who takes other people's ideas and research and you synthesize them and you popularize them and you explain them, which is all, I think, incredibly important work. And in this book, what you do is you do that, but you also bring in your own reporting in a way that you've never really done before.
Yeah. This book is much more on the ground. I mean, I went all over the world and talked to people, either experts or people who had experienced epiphanies, who had left, cults or other things like that. 9/11 truthers who were no longer 9/11 truthers, that sort of thing. Because I wanted to, what I quickly realized in the beginning was I started the research just asking scientists, how do you change people's minds? They were like, I don't know.
Right.
I was talking to anthropologists and sociologists and neuroscientists, and they each had a different way of saying I don't know. that was specific to their silo. But they would say, like, this is the sort of the unspoken great mystery of social science, is that you're talking about going not just the bleeding edge, you're talking to just the unknown of what we talk about. Like we're not even going there yet. We haven't even built the foundations to understand it. And then I was like, what do I tell my editor? Nobody knows. And so I thought, okay, the way to get at it is to go out into the field and meet people who've had great changes, of huge mind changes, 180s that not Facebook argument changes, super life changes, and then take what they experienced and then go back to the experts and say, okay, this happened, explain it to me in your language, And that led to, okay, now I have tools, now I'll go out and now I know what to look for. And that's how I found the people who had the good persuasive techniques. So.
Okay, cool. So what I want to do is in a minute, I want to start to hear some of those stories. And what I want to do before, it's like I said, I thought we'd just take a break and just see what I might, if folks have questions, like this is like my short version. In my other job at Trampoline Hall, I spend like 10 minutes telling people how to ask good questions. I'm going to tell you like the 30-second version, which is when we ask for questions, we'd like them to be actual questions. That's basically it. And typically a question isn't super long, and it's not it's a question. So with all of that, that's that. I really like one. And look, there's one in the back. Yes, what's your question?
A lot of the things that are changing our minds now are artificial intelligence, gathering our thoughts and telling us what we should think on Facebook and whatnot. What can we do to protect ourselves from that type of persuasion?
So what can we do to specifically protect the Facebook AI from changing our minds?
Yeah, well, I have an episode of the podcast about that. We did put it out about 6 months ago. It's called Machine Bias. So it's an hour and a half. I talked to artificial intelligence researchers, and there are artificial intelligence ethicists. There are people who actually are hired by Silicon Valley now to advise them on how not to do what they've been doing. And that is a problem because we're in the very early stages of all this. It's not even close. But I did ask one of the world's leading experts on AI is like, how long till Westworld? Like how long?
Yeah.
How long? Like give me a real number. And I mean,
is there a number you're hoping for? Like
I was hoping like within my lifetime, right? Maybe that's weird, but I was hoping for it.
That's why I asked.
And she told me 700 years.
What?
And I was like, is that like how guessy is that? And she says, absolutely, it is 700 years. That's I am telling you, like, this is all I do every day. It's 700 years.
Okay.
And she said that's 700 years until the artificial intelligence that will be, it will have consciousness. That's what she says.
Okay. Well, I find that reassuring.
Yeah.
But then in the short term, what are you going to do about the AIs that control our still?
Well, so right now we know that our biases are in our machines. We build the machines based off a corpus of information that's available. So predictive text is a great example of this. Everybody has predictive text on their phones, and you may not have noticed that it's slowly changing, but just 2 years ago, if you had typed in, say, the nurse told me that the next thing it predicts would be she, right? Or if the pilot told me that, the next thing it would predict would be he. And it was because it was based off of, they actually took this giant collection of newspapers and they gave it to the machine and said, this is how people talk. Right. Yeah. And that's from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And,
getting worse.
So it looked at the world as it was, and that's how it predicts it's going to be, which is also how brains work, which relates straight to the book that I'm working on right now. That is the machine equivalent of prejudice, because that's what prejudice is. It's taking your existing model of reality or looking back in the past and assuming that predicts the present. And that's all it's been doing, is trying to help us. It's like, this is what you know, right? 80% of the words say he here. Pilots are
right. It's just we're just teaching it. We're like we're telling it like be like us.
Right.
And then it turns around and it's like crappy.
And you're like, oh my God, it's just like us.
It's like, oh great.
So now we have to go in and manually say, no, you don't predict the world as it was, predict the world as it should be or as we would like it to be, or be more neutral in some way. So that's all across the board. And every instance of us trying to use AI to solve a problem has introduced some form of our current biases into it. The predictive policing is another example of that, where they and this may blow your mind, but I didn't know this until I talked to somebody that many judges and in America, I don't know how it is here, but they use a program to quickly get through their caseloads, where they look at the defendant and they decide whether or not that person gets bail or what kind of sentence they get based off what the machine tells them to do. And the machine is racist because it's doing the same thing as predictive text. And so it says this person is not likely to repeat, and this person is likely to repeat based off of their skin color, that are based off of all sorts of things that a judge might bypass, but they're so stressed and they're so overworked that they just believe what the machine tells them.
So you just like bake all that stuff back into the system.
Yeah, and then what that does is that creates feedback loops. And the same thing with predictive policing. The algorithm, some departments only have so many police officers, and so this is way worse in smaller towns where they will they say, where should I patrol tonight? And it will tell them patrol here because that's where the most crimes are. Well, then that's the only place the police are, so that's the only place that future arrests will take place, and now you have a feedback loop. So,
and with all that stuff, there's, I guess, this illusion of objectivity. Like, it's
that
one
was
thing
the
to
idea,
say,
yeah.
the idea is say, well, sure, we know cops are discriminatory, but look, this is a
machine.
A machine can be discriminatory, but it turns out we managed to make one.
So the current solution has been to have human beings come in and bypass those things like manually, and so the next wave will be creating machines that tell the other machines don't be biased. So that's where we are with it right now. So you're right. You're right to be freaked out because that's people's lives in the last decade have been ruined by machines in that way. And it's just taking our human biases and translating them into a machine.
Sure. All right, let's take one more question. Yeah.
Can you make a distinction between people who engage in social posturing versus people who think they're absolutely right?
So the question is, can you tell between people who are engaging in social posturing versus people who just think they're right?
Yeah.
Like, you mean some people just seem like are just pretending to be certain, but they're not really certain, you mean? Or?
They're speaking for a third-party audience. They're trying to fit into a group.
Mm.
Like, is there a distinction between people
Like who, sorry?
I would say like Sarah Huckabee's.
Like Sarah Huckabee's is its example.
Is there a distinction?
So there's a distinction between people who are just overly certain versus people who are posturing. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
By trying to fit into a group.
Well, I mean, I in the book I read there's a whole chapter about tribal psychology and how to escape it and how to use what we know about tribal psychology to knock people out of it, or to use moral reframing to create arguments that start from group loyalty.
And can you describe it when you talk about tribal? I've just lost the phrase. Tribal.
Yeah, and that term may change. I know nobody knows what to call it, and I know that there's movement to go to in-group, out-group loyalty, whatever. But right now we're calling it tribalism.
Can you define that? Like in terms of terms, can you define that? It's like what, choosing your beliefs because they.
Right. So we're not motivated by accuracy, right? And that's a good thing to start with. And so what are we motivated by? A lot of stuff. And sometimes we're motivated by tribal loyalty. In fact, often, right? So with confirmation bias, that's from it's better to be wrong than it is to be food. That's what that boils down to.
Right.
And with tribal loyalty, it's better to be wrong than it is to be ostracized.
Right.
And Dan Kahan, who is the leading researcher in this, he told me, is like people will choose to be wrong before they will choose to be wrong before they'll choose to be ostracized, always. If it means being a better member of your group, you will be wrong. And in his research, people will know the right answer to certain questions, and if they're incentivized with money, they'll get the right answer. If they're not incentivized at all, they always get the wrong answer if it goes against what they think their group would expect them to do. There's an evolutionary explanation for that, and there's also just a practical explanation for it. If you live in a small town in Mississippi and you are a barber and you're like, I think climate change is real, and you might lose your business, right? And the crazy thing about that is no one, unless you're a climate scientist who goes to Antarctica and does core samples, you do not know anything about climate science.
Sure.
Right? So you're basing your opinion on group loyalty, whether or not you believe or don't believe in climate change.
Yeah.
And so often when you're expressing your opinion, you're just signaling to the others that I'm a good member, don't ostracize me.
And presumably those are true not just of the opinions you express, but of the opinions that you actually hold.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, there's no difference.
But that's how so in terms of your questions, like, is there a difference? The answer is like, in the normal
the answer I would say, the problem is anything can be polluted by tribal psychology. So why climate change and not volcanoes, right? Why would the example Dan Kahan uses is the HPV vaccine versus the HBV vaccine.
Right.
The HPV vaccine was politicized. The HBV vaccine wasn't. They're identical in every way. It was politicized because you have to be inoculated as a young woman, and there was all this conservative uproar about, are we telling young women to be promiscuous? We give them permission for it. HBV has the exact same model, but it just that didn't go
doesn't
through.
Connect with values that are tribal values that are tribal, that it's like, I'm in this group.
Well, it's because the drug companies tried to push through the HPV vaccine quickly to outdo each other, and that got it debated in Congress. And if it goes to Congress, it's going to be political. If it's political, it's going to be tribal. Tribal psychology is going to come in.
And again, you see that all over. Like you see it. And I think one thing that I always find useful to think about this stuff is, again, like it's not just like, it's this thing these other guys do. It's on both sides. Like if you're someone on the left, like, and you think of like, what would it take to change your opinion about climate change? Like it's going to take a lot. lot because you're so invested.
Yeah,
in
and your
that.
investment's not the facts. That's the thing. That's
Right.
the digestive
Yeah,
system I was talking about.
Yeah, I believe climate change because I know that scientists say it's true, and because like the New York Times says it's true, and I believe scientists in the New York Times. And like there might be reasons why I think those are better sources than other people, but I haven't done the science myself. I'm just like, oh, the people who say it's true are scientists in the New York Times. The people who say it's not true are, Fox News and Republicans. And I think I'm right. I mean, I'm not saying they're equal, but like if I actually look in my heart and think why I believe it, it actually doesn't. I like to say it's because of science, but I haven't read any of the studies. Like I just look at it because I'm just like, oh, I trust those people. I don't trust those people. If I trusted opposite, if I thought scientists were a bunch of super biased liberals, and I thought the same thing about the New York Times, I'd probably just think the other.
It's rational. It's rational. It's not irrational to think that way.
Right.
So I guess the short answer to that, really, when you think about it, this is
there will be no short answers tonight.
I've never done a short answer. Is any issue that becomes politicized there will be no differentiation. So the only differentiation is between whether or not it got politicized. And so Dan Kahan's advice is be very careful if you're a scientific organization, how you tell the public. He says you need to figure out how many different tribes are you speaking to and make a different press release for each one, and be very careful about making it an us versus them thing. He said self-driving cars could immediately become politicized. It's unbelievable, but it could.
It's the only Facebook. When you're talking about, I've gotten into like huge Facebook fights about self-driving cars with people in this room. So it's actually happening. I don't even want to mention it because I don't want to open up that thing again. It's horrible.
Yeah, that's it. It just moves out of the domain of just facts and stuff we know to this is now a way I signaled my loyalty to my in-group.
So let's come back now to so we were just talking before we went to the audience. You're just starting to talk about like some of the stuff that's going on in the book and some of the stuff where you were doing some of your own kind of original journalism and research for that on this really complicated issue of like these moments where minds actually do change or people do change their minds. And so I'm curious like. Well, there were a few different stories in there. I'm curious if there's one that for you, like what felt to you particularly exciting as like a piece of journalistic research. Do
you want an activist or do you want somebody who had an epiphany?
Let's start with the epiphany and then do the activist.
Okay, so my favorite story for an epiphanous person, even though I went to Westboro and that's really fun stuff as far as like how the person that I think that I spent the most time I just felt charged with responsibility to tell the story properly was his name is Charlie Veach, and he was a 9/11 truther. So if you look up 9/11 truthers who've changed their mind on Google, he comes up in like the first 40 things, right? And because he's the only one.
So he's all the first 40. He's not like in the top 40. He is the top 40. Okay.
And I just asked him, I was like, I'd like to come meet you and tell me how you changed your mind. And he said, okay. And he hadn't done an interview in a number of years. So he researched me to make sure I wasn't going to come like steal his hair or something. Because
is that a specific 9/11 truth or fear? Or
it is. Because he had it. I'll get there. There's a reason why he was. There's a reason why he was afraid. He was correct to be afraid of me. So he was just sort of a shits and giggles YouTuber who would like do pranks. Right. He hated Scientology, so he would like run around and harass Scientologists and sing songs in front of them, and that got some hits. Anonymous got interested in him and republished some of his stuff, and he was like, oh, this could be a thing I do, and so he started staging crazier pranks where he would go in front of like Westminster Abbey and talk about how everybody was brainwashed or whatever, and it was just to get YouTube hits. So one day he was a little bit into the 9/11 world because he was, as an internet person of that time, that's a lot of what was going on. It's still going on now. And he was just kind of fascinated with Alex Jones and all that stuff.
And there's a whole community there, right? Like that's
huge.
part of what's not totally evident to me is like, oh, it's not just like there's a couple of people who think that. There's like when you talk about tribes, it's like, oh, that's a tribe. There's a community, and that can actually become part of your identity.
That's the big deal. That's what's happening here.
You're like part of who I am in the world is like I'm a 9/11 truther. That's me.
Because he was feeling very just empty as a person. He said he felt like a cog in a machine. He had a 9-to-5 cubicle, and he had this fire in his belly, and he couldn't do anything with it. And so he was susceptible to Alex Jones type stuff, and he felt like he was smart and he was seeing the machinations of the hidden details. And so one of his pranks that he did is he went in front of the embassy, the U.S. embassy in the UK, and he was doing one of his rants, and the police came out and they made him, they stripped him down and they checked all of his stuff, and he kept filming, and then they were like, you have to stop filming. And he was like, look, they're making me stop filming. But the law was that you have to do that. You're
Just the law. And he went in there knowing that. He's like,
you might be trying to blow up the embassy. We don't know. But they had like machine guns. They looked very militaristic. And so when he got all of his stuff back, he put it on YouTube, and Alex Jones, his team somehow found it.
Alex Jones is the big 9/11 truther. I'm
Yes.
not
Yeah,
a big fan of the 9/11 truthers.
Oh, he was the emperor of 9/11 truthers, and he asked Charlie, would you like to come on my show? And he said yes. And now Alex Jones, his show still goes out to 9.6 million people every single episode, every single day, live.
So is his show just a 9/11 truther show?
No,
it's other stuff. He does
any conspiracy will do.
Yeah, is he just okay.
And
Just be, so a 9/11 truther is what people who believe that it was the 9/11 attacks were an inside job.
well, they have a variety of theories, but their community is based off is the official story is not true. Most of them think either the United States did it to get into a war, to start a war, or they go so far as to think it's the Bilderbergers and the Illuminati. It could be all sorts of things. But the thing is, it isn't what they told you, right? We're in the army of light, and we will show you the truth. So after he did that, he became, he's like, this is what I'll make videos out of. And he started being invited over and over again. And he started to rise up in the ranks. And he's a young guy, he's a good-looking guy, he's very charismatic, he's very good in front of the camera. He started being invited more and more to Alex Jones stuff. He met David Icke, who's the guy who thinks that the world is run by secret reptiles. Yeah. And I actually asked Charlie, I was like, that didn't
tip you? Like you were like, you didn't feel your gut. And what did he say?
He said, well, they tell you very nicely. That's what he told me. They tell you nicely in a way. I was like, what do they tell you? And he said, well, they say that the dinosaurs didn't die out. They evolved and became intelligent, and then they built civilizations, and they hid, and they let us evolve. And then they, being super intelligent by the time that we have cities, start sending operatives to, Obama was a reptile, and, Oprah is a reptile. And I was like, that doesn't seem weird to you? He's like, you guys gotta understand, you have to take, I was a little skeptical, but I don't know, maybe,
steps.
maybe.
Right, and again, that's the tribal thing.
But that's what was happening.
All the
is
people
that
around
he
you.
was a lost soul who had found his tribe.
Right, and if you're surrounded by people who believe just about anything, it seems like it's a testament. It's like, oh, there's enough people around who believe that thing. You're like, well, I don't know, it seems kind of crazy, but everybody else around me seems to believe
he
it.
actually said to me, I feel like I was embraced. I felt like they were picking nits, like chimpanzees. He felt like he was
cared for.
He was the first people who took him seriously and loved him, and he was in a tribe finally, and he really cared about it. And he told me, I felt whenever I would replace Alex Jones, I would get rid of the weird stuff. Like I kind of have to pay my dues, and then I will make it kind of more rational and scientific when I get up there. So he had become famous enough that he was making a great living off YouTube videos. They're getting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hits each, views it, and he was.
And by this point, we assume he believes this. Like he's not just
he does
saying
believe
this.
it, very
He's not
much
just
so.
saying this because he's like trying to game the system or get YouTube hits. He
Yeah.
really, in his heart, he's like,
Totally.
9/11 was an inside job
Absolutely.
or whatever.
Yeah.
The crazy thing.
Yeah.
Is, right?
And he becomes so famous that there was in that era. This would be about 7 years ago. The other channels, often you'll become a guest on somebody else's YouTube channel to promote their channel.
Right.
And he was doing a lot of that, and he was again good-looking, charismatic, great in front of the camera. He had more money than he'd ever had before, and he had started to get involved with the truth juice community.
With the what?
Truth juice.
What's the truth juice community?
It's like sex, drugs, and free Wi-Fi. They're like they have festivals and stuff, and it's all about opening up your third eye, and becoming cybernetically enhanced, and it was like.
So it's a different truth. They're not 9/11 truthers.
Different truth.
They're just
the
about
truth.
The big. Okay.
The truth.
Like okay.
And he met his partner there, and he was going to these festivals, and he was like more of a superstar in that world, right? And this is really that's an important point. Okay, that's the most important point because he had found a second tribe.
Right.
Okay. So at the BBC decides they're going to do a show called, like a reality show called Conspiracy Road Trip. You have to bootleg it if you want to watch it. They took it all off the internet, which I did.
You wonder why that happened.
And each episode they pick a different conspiracy theory, and they have people who are true believers, and they bring the experts to them, or they bring them to the experts, and they see what happens. They just want fireworks for reality show stuff, right? And so they got him and 5 other 9/11 truthers, and they put them on. They asked him, "Would you like to go?" And they found him at a Truth Juice festival, and they said, "We'll send you to New York. All expenses paid. A week. It'll be fun." He's like, "Can I make YouTube videos?" Absolutely. He's like, "Oh, this would be great for me." And so he said yes. And so he and 5 other 9/11 truthers went to New York City, and they went to Pennsylvania. They went to Ground Zero, all the Ground Zeros.
So they take all the truthers on this trip, and they're trying to persuade them that they're.
They were really just trying to get them to argue,
just to
for TV, because
right.
they have a comedian who's the host of it, and he's kind of like ribbing them and everything.
Right.
It was, in a lot of ways, it was exploitative, and it was more or less making fun of them. Like we would be making, you watch it to laugh at them,
Right.
Which is once you.
And that's just going to strengthen it. I mean, it's like that's going to like you want to exacerbate tribalism. You take a bunch of those people and put them on TV and make fun of them and make them like goofs, and now they're just going to double down.
Absolutely. Right? So they all go, and I mean, they do everything. They meet the architects of the original World Trade Center. They meet demolition experts. They meet widows and widowers, and they go to the Ground Zero and all this stuff. And so somewhere in the middle of all that, his big thing was that he thought that it was a controlled demolition. And there are a lot of videos that try to show this, that they thought it exploded in such a way that it had to have been charges, and then it fell into its footprint. And he met a demolitions expert who said, it didn't fall into its footprint. That's just incorrect.
That's not true. So even the premise, the premise of your very faulty, flawed, crazy argument actually isn't even true.
They blew outward,
right.
And then he said, "Look, to put charges in that building, I mean, it would take months. You don't think people would notice, and you don't just put charges. You have to do these jackhammers that go into the building very deeply, and you plant them." He said he laid out all the reasons why it was possible. He had models available. He showed them. All the other truthers looked at this and were like,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
They didn't believe it. Like, whatever.
Sure, that's what you want us to believe.
But for some reason, Charlie was like, I think I'm just wrong. And then he met a widow, and she cried, and they embraced, and he felt a very human connection with her, and he was like, "There's no way this woman is lying to me." And then when they got back to the hotel, the other truthers were like, "Can you believe the actress they got for that? She wasn't convincing." And but he was like, "These people are animals." That's what he said to me. He's like, "I had this thought. I was like, I'm surrounded by animals. I'm an animal." He was very rattled. So he went to Times Square, and he made a selfie video to his followers and said, "I just want you to know, if we're about the truth, I've been convinced that it was not an inside job." And he laid out all the reasons why. He said, "When I get back home, I will start making videos about what I think is actually happening. If we're committed to the truth, let's be committed to the truth." And then his life was destroyed.
His life was destroyed.
So, the first thing that happens is all the other truthers start making videos. Who got to Charlie? Was he a double agent the whole time? Are they paying him off? I knew that's what they would do. The BBC they hired someone to brainwash him. They put him in room 101. That's what happened. Right. And they start doing this. So he starts trying to defend himself, and he's on the videos, and he's like, "No, listen. So look, if it's this thing and the demolition," and they're all like, "We've heard this before. I can't. What happened to you? What happened to you?" Yeah. So he gets very angry and upset with them. Alex Jones made a video that was like, "Don't trust Charlie Beach. When there's always going to be people like that, and they're going to get you. They smell like goblins."
Now I know why people love his show.
Yeah, he's great. He's like, "You can smell the goblin vomit." And it was really ominous. He did it with a red light bulb, but he has no shirt on. He's like really tight. He's like, "There's always going to be a Charlie Beach. Don't trust him." But he's feeling the free fall of being ostracized by your tribe. Like he's feeling that very visceral bodily fear of, oh my God, I am being completely kicked out. And the worst thing they did is that they found his sister's Facebook page. They found pictures of his niece and nephew, and then they photoshopped child pornography to have his niece and nephew's faces on the child pornography, and then they sent that to his boss and his mom. And his mom, who's not internet savvy, thought it was real, and so his life is being destroyed left and right. He eventually has to change his name. He has to move to a different city. He has to deal with this, trying to get work. And when he finally got a job, it was from an employer who like understood what was happening. Mm-hmm. So he really did like this. That's the thing. The thing he was afraid of. The thing we're all afraid of when we think about being ostracized. Right. The tribal signaling that we do is for a good reason, because when he did commit that error of saying, "I just simply changed my mind," they didn't say, "Well, he changed his mind." They were like, "He must be destroyed," and they did. They effectively did, right? But why did he change his mind?
Right.
Nobody else did.
Right.
Everyone else, like in the interviews at the end, they're all like, "I believe more strongly now than I did before," and that's called the Backfire Effect. We can get into that, which is the new research shows that it's a little bit different than we thought it was before. But they exhibited the Backfire Effect, and he did not. Why did he not? Because he had another tribe. Because he had the freedom to change his mind. And if you only spend time with one particular subculture and you can't afford to signal anything but what they need you to signal, you are trapped. And I believe we should have empathy for that. I do. I think that when we see people who are not able to change their minds because they're afraid that they're going to have their lives ruined, and maybe not at his level, but at any level, give them a break, that they're not listening to what you're telling them. That's why the facts are bouncing off their head. They have to. Biologically, they must. And he had the freedom to not do it. So I mean, the prescriptive advice is move in as many circles as possible, so you have that freedom. And he did. And that's what happened. That's what he did for a number of years after that. He went into the Truth Jews, and he did a lot of great work. He actually did a lot of great humanitarian work with the community after that. But that's the lesson.
And it feels like part of it too is like to take that and move it over to your own self. So it's not just like, oh, that's how crazy people form their crazy beliefs. It's how normal people form our normal beliefs.
It's just how humans
too,
work,
right? Like
how brains work.
You go around and you look at the things you believe, and you're like, it's interesting that like the things that I believe tend to be the things that like, educated middle class people in Toronto who went to universities believe, and not say people who were born in Iraq believe. And is it because just like by coincidence, it's like, no, like I'm fitting into this world, or people who grew up in your part of the world, or people who grew up, that like, and that part of it too in that story too is that it's not again, like it's not a bug, it's a feature. That like our minds aren't like that. It's like maladaptive to be right when everybody around you thinks something different. Like it's not actually adaptive. It would be a weird.
Yeah, we have psychological mechanisms that allow for this is that'll be another rant, but we have mechanisms in place for people who are sort of the scouts and the early adopters in our communities to bring the information to us, and then we can argue about it, and there's a way for us to change slowly. But for someone to boldly
through the right channels.
Yeah, I mean he was a heretic.
Not by someone just like being like, hey, wait a minute, the core belief of our entire community is wrong. That's not going to work. That's not going to work out well.
You can just imagine it. Imagine any community you're in. Imagine somebody standing up and saying the opposite of what everybody believes and being like, "You're all wrong." And there's a great there's a study that illustrates how we all do this. And something came out of Kahan's lab called the Cultural Cognition Lab. You can look them up. A lot of this stuff is freely available, and it's not locked behind paywalls. It's called the Cultural Cognition Laboratory at Yale. They had this great study where they show people. They first test people to determine their math ability, like their innate math scores, almost like something like from a standardized test, and then they show them this kind of hard to parse data on a new skin cream. And if you're really good at math, you can determine if it's effective or not. And if you're not very good at math, you kind of won't get the right answer.
Right.
And so they take that knowledge and they run the thing again, except this time instead of being a skin cream, they say it's a study into whether or not gun control works.
Right.
And for some people, they gave them data that showed that it was very effective. And
Right.
for some people, they gave them data that showed it's all fake. But they gave them data that showed
Right.
it was very ineffective. And they found that the better you were at math, the worse you were at understanding the data if the data showed something that would have go against your tribe.
So it's actually the opposite. So being better at
Yeah.
math actually makes you
Right.
worse.
Yeah.
So in the first case, in the innocuous
Yeah.
case, being better at math helps you, as you would expect it
Yes.
would. But in the second case, it actually makes you
Yes,
worse.
but it's the
You're like-
exact same data, the same
Right,
numbers.
It's the same numbers, just with different words.
It's just got a different,
Wow.
sheen, a patina
Whoa. Oh,
that
it's
says
so
this.
upsetting.
So like if you're a Democrat and the data say that gun control is ineffective, the
Right.
better you are at math, the more likely you'll get the incorrect answer.
Oh my God,
But
that's
if
so
you're-
crazy.
but if
Unless
you're-
you're terrible at math, in which case it's great news.
Yeah, and if you're a Republican and it says gun control is effective, the better you are at math, the more likely you get the wrong number. But if it says the opposite, what determines whether or not you're right or wrong goes back to being just your math ability.
So it's like being smart actually becomes like a way,
Because
like
you-
it's not a way to get closer to the truth. Being smart is
Oh,
a
yeah.
tool, not
Yes.
for getting closer to the truth. It's just a tool for like more deeply
That's one of
ingrained
our biggest
stuff you already
misconceptions.
want
That's
to
one of the biggest
believe.
misconceptions. The smarter you are, the better you are at justifying your incorrect beliefs.
Right. All right. Cool. I see questions, but you know what? I want to hear a little bit more, and then we'll come to some questions after we hear a bit more about this. I totally appreciate it, but I want to hear more about the thing. I want to hear about more is the activist stuff that you were talking about, and just how, if you can give us like and I also want to make sure that we have time for questions. So I'm not sure if there's like a short version of that story in terms
can
of like
do it,
how that
yeah.
how that works or
Well, this is the
whatever.
best. This is the beating heart of the book.
Okay.
The way the book really happened was, I was pretty convinced people couldn't change their minds. I was actually at an event like this, and the Q&As were like, how do I convince my dad that Barack Obama wasn't born in Kenya, and that kind of stuff. And I was like, you can't. Because I thought that,
Because that's what the social science
that's
says.
pretty much, right?
Yeah.
And I had interviewed Hugo Mercier, who has this great model of who explaining the adaptiveness of like biases. So he's saying they're not flaws; they're just biases.
Right.
And that started to kind of get me thinking. And then I read in the New York Times about this group of people who were going door to door, and they were changing people's minds on contentious issues in 20 minutes or less. And it was
And this is the leadership lab.
that was a leadership lab. And so I just thought that's everything. That's everything. That's
So they're going to
so
people's
counter
doors, so they're going to
everything.
people's doors, they're having 20-minute long conversations, and
On
in
average,
those
yeah.
20-minute conversations, they are, with some frequency, changing people's
Yeah,
minds on important
flipping
issues.
them, flipping them.
Okay.
So I was like, I have to go there. So that's how the book started. Was I went there 3 times and trained with underneath them and then did the canvassing with them all across Los Angeles on 3 different occasions. I spent about a week with them each time, and lots and lots of stuff, lots of interviews, lots of transcribing, and I got to know them really well. And I still talk to them every couple of weeks. What they've done is tremendous. I mean, they have pushed ahead social science 100 years.
And they're not scientists.
And they're not scientists.
Right.
They had no idea why it works, and that's a lot of the book is me saying, okay, here's this, now how does it work? Because the way they're able to do it is that they had a lot of funding.
Right.
They're the activism wing of the Los Angeles LGBT Center, and they have an operating budget of like $98 million a year, and they give a portion of it to them to go out and just do research. And they had experienced Prop 8, which they had very much expected to win. They had very much expected that for same-sex marriage to become legal in California, and they put it to a vote, and they lost the vote. And
Right.
it didn't make any sense because it was in the United States. It was like the most gay-friendly place, and,
Right.
and a lot of people moved there for that reason. And they just were appalled and they were gutted. And so the head of the organization, David Fleischer, he was like, "How do we do a post-mortem on this? What do we do?"
Right. So like, how did that happen?
How did it happen?
Like, maybe someone did change. Did it feel like someone did change the population's mind?
They were just like, "How did that happen?"
Right.
And he's like, "Let's just go ask."
Right.
And so he had this crazy idea. It's like, let's organize brigades of people who will go out into the neighborhood. Instead of doing political canvassing, they will just knock on people's doors and say, why did you vote against us?
Right.
Why did you do that? And so they used voter roll information and got kind of an idea of where they could go, where people probably were most likely to have voted against them. And they knock on the doors and they ask them why.
Right.
And so what they found, and they ended up doing this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times over the course of months. And they got this great bank of data. And they found that the answers were either religion, tradition, or my kids. And that didn't. And what happened was, after a couple of months, the kids stopped being that stopped being an answer. And
Right.
like, why would that have been an answer? And then it would have gone away.
Right.
And that's when they had their revelation, was that it was because there was this one little attack ad that ran during the build-up to Prop 8, which they called the Princess ad.
Right.
And a little girl runs into the kitchen and is like, Mommy, Mommy, I learned that.
Can we see? I think we have the ad. Can we see it?
Do you have the ad?
I think we have the ad. Can we run it? This is really just shocking, just in terms of like, this is what changed.
This ran like every commercial
A
break
state's
for
mind.
2 months.
It's not super important that you see it if we can't get it up, but if we can, let's see.
Guess what I learned in school today?
What, sweetie?
I learned how a prince married a prince, and I can marry a princess.
Think it can happen? It's already happened. When Massachusetts legalized gay marriage, schools began teaching second graders that boys can marry boys. The courts ruled parents had no right to object.
Under California law, public schools instruct kids about marriage. Teaching children about gay marriage will happen here unless we pass Proposition 8. Yes on 8.
Okay.
So that they figured that was the thing that changed people's
Well, they
minds.
knew
That
it-
brilliant, well-crafted piece of
Yes.
subtle propaganda.
So that ran every commercial break. You know, in between, you're watching Law and Order. That comes up every commercial break. They really blanketed the area. And he knew from the polling that the polling showed that mostly Democratic voters in the area were strongly on their side, and then the 6 weeks out, they started to turn.
Right.
And that was when this ad was running, and then he thought about how people were no longer talking about that.
We're talking about
the
their families,
kids.
about the kids,
It's
right.
because when they won, they stopped running the ads.
Right.
He's like, now it's not in their mind, now it's not salient. And what he realized was there were people who thought they were allies who were persuadable, but they didn't know they were persuadable.
Right.
And they had found the chink in their armor, which was get them scared about their children.
Right.
Make them think about, you don't have control over what you tell your kids. And he was like, but what makes David Fleischer one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my entire life was that his leap was to say, but that means they're persuadable.
Right. So rather than say like, hey, they'll flip to the other side, they're like secret homophobes or whatever. It's like, oh no, they're
They're naturally ambivalent.
they're ambivalent people.
Which means that we can go talk to them probably.
Right.
Like that if we tell them this is what happened, they'll be appalled.
Right.
And we probably can pull them back, and when the election comes back around, they will definitely vote on our side this time.
Right.
So he changed the listening brigades into being persuasion brigades. And so he would go out in groups of about 75 people. Most of them were volunteers from UCLA, and so with a rotating staff of people at the center. I mean, they take this very seriously. There's lots
Right.
of training involved, and but they had no idea what to do at first, and they knew they had the time and the money to make an iterative process about it. So they would go out, they'd knock on the doors, and they would, first thing they did, of course, facts. That's what they tried to use.
Right.
And they did that for, like he said, I think like 4 years. They were like,
They
well,
give people facts.
here are the facts.
Here are the facts. Here's
Here are
why
the
you
facts.
should-
Here are the
here's why you
facts.
should see it
Here are the facts.
differently.
Why, and the people were like me, and they were like, why is this not working? And they noticed that, so they started, they're like, we have to figure out if people are saying the same thing. So they start recording it on audio. Then when video becomes cheaper, they move to little video cameras. And then when you have smartphones, it's even easier. So now now every conversation is being recorded. Okay, they have 13,000 conversations.
Right.
Every single one is recorded.
Right.
Teams of people are watching all the stuff and figuring out
And they're like going door to door, knocking at people's doors.
every other Saturday.
Right.
And they were like, if it seems like this person moved a little bit, we'll do that again. If it
Right.
seems like it moved in the other way, never do that
So they're
again.
like A/B testing. They're like
Right.
A/B testing this whole thing.
Right.
It's not, they're not like doing science in a lab. They're doing like just
Well,
live
and,
A/B testing.
they don't even
of, like,
think they're doing science.
They're not. Yeah. There's no theory.
Yeah.
They're just like, let's just like repeat what seems to be working and drop what seems to not
Yeah.
be working, and they're just doing that again and again.
Yeah. And so no success. Like we're talking 5 years in, they're still not getting anywhere.
Right.
And that's why this is such a boon to science. If this had been done at a university as like a science initiative, it would have been killed like very quickly.
Right.
Like that much failure, that much money,
Right.
impossible. But they had 3 conversations. He said, and Fleischer watches every conversation. He said he noticed there were 3 conversations when somebody changed their mind.
Three.
3.
Into not like
Yeah.
3 per 100,
Yeah.
not 3 per 1,000, just
Just
3.
3.
Wow.
13,000. And so they just took everything and threw it away and said, let's look at those 3 a lot.
Wow.
What happened?
Right.
And they hammered at it, and they were like, they realized, wait, I think the reason, we didn't talk.
Right.
They talked. And that was when that was the first moment they're like, oh no, this has nothing to do with me trying to tell you what to think. We just sat there and listened, and they worked it out. They changed their own mind. And then they were like, that's what we go for. And so that's sort of this next iterative process. And then they did the same thing they did before, but they started from the perspective of let's do 80% listening, 20% talking.
Right.
And they started getting like 2 mind changes per Saturday, and then 20.
So they went from like 0 out of 13, like 3 out of 13,000 to 2 per Saturday.
Yeah. And then
by just doing more listening,
Yes.
by talking more and listening.
Yeah. And so doing A/B testing from there, 8 years on after that, they have a technique that works. 20% of the people they talk to, and this is insane. Like every other technique that's ever attempted something like this, the success rate is around 1%. They're getting like 20%, which is plenty to change an election, to start a social change. And it was at that point that scientists came in to study them. Now, there was a whole debacle where the first scientists to study them committed fraud, where they copy-pasted data from another bit of research, and it almost destroyed everything.
Right.
I mean, they almost lost this amazing thing. Is a gift to humanity that I hope this book brings out to the world. Is it almost was lost to all of us just because some grad student committed fraud, and all the headlines. Everybody was eager for this not to be real. So all the headlines, like the same, the New York Times, the New Yorker, and the Atlantic were all like, turns out you can't change people's minds. Right? But it was just fraudulent. It was just fraudulent data. And so luckily for them, there were 2 grad students, David Brockman and Joshua Kalla, who were already hanging out with them, and they were like, look, as far as I'm concerned, the research hasn't been done. Can we just do it? And they were like, okay. And there was the people who, a lot of people lost their careers over that fraud. But they went out with them to Miami. They were doing canvassing, and I should tell you what they were talking about. They were talking. At first, they were talking about just LGBT rights and same-sex marriage, but then they moved on to abortion rights, access to abortion rights, and then they started moving on to transgender bathroom laws that were any place where there was a chance that there would be a really draconian transgender bathroom ordinance or whatever. They would go there,
right,
and they would see if they could flip people before the vote. And the scientists researched them there, and then it was like, it works. It totally works. It works so well, we don't know what to do with it. And like Betsy Levy-Pollock and all these other great
and what's
figures.
the explanation for that? Like, what? So I want to make sure I understand the result, and let me see if I get what the explanation is. So the result is that the way to change people's minds, so for like decades, what scientists have known is like, you can't change people's minds by giving them the facts. And then what scientists conclude from that is, well, you just can't change people's minds.
Yeah.
But then what these people discover is like, oh, actually, you can change people's minds just by by asking them questions.
Okay,
and
so
investigating the source of the beliefs and the nature of their beliefs and things.
It's going to get a little complicated, but it'll be okay. Okay, so here's how the technique works. Here's what they do. This is something I had to find out, because when I talked to Joshua, I talked to the scientists who did this. I was like, so tell me how it works. And they're like, look, this is like finding out that aspirin cures headaches,
right?
And then that's where we're at,
right?
We don't know how it does it. We just know it does it. And so that was one of those things where I was like, I took it to a lot of very smart people, and they were like, well, I can see aspects of this in it. I can see aspects of this in it, and you end up seeing, as Betsy Levy-Pollock said, it's a kitchen sink persuasion technique. It's what they did is something that would never have been able to be discovered through the normal channels. They took about a dozen, which unknown to them that these things existed.
Just by experiment.
They rediscovered about 6 different persuasion techniques, and they figured out a way to things and therapy techniques that had never been done in the wild, only been done either been done in a lab or in a therapeutic setting. They figured out a way to do it in person very quickly, and they figured out a way to combine them in sort of you do this, and then it hands off to this, then it hands off to this. So the way it works, a typical thing would be, they say, there's a ordinance coming around here soon. It's going to make it so, there'll be no transgender bathrooms in your area. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about that? 100%. You're 100% in favor of, this law not being, however you want to put it. I guess either you're 100% in favor of this, or you're 0% in favor of it. Where do you put yourself in favor? Put yourself on the scale. So what they're trained to do is whatever somebody says, ignore. The first thing a person says will be signaling to you, I'm a good person.
Right. So they're just telling you what they're supposed to say.
What they think that you want to hear.
Right.
And what they're kind of reading this
Right.
person.
Right.
You
So
know.
just what you want to hear. It's not even what they might say to their friends or whatever.
So ignore that. And then the next thing you do is they would take attack ads like the one you saw, and they eventually started making their own, which are really brutal. The ones they make themselves, they really get down in there. And the idea is to evoke that person's prejudice.
I see. So they make their own attack ads to show, like attack ads for the other side.
Yeah.
And be like, hey, what do you think about that?
And the training's very specific. They tell you exactly how to start it
Right.
and how to get it into the person's hand.
Right.
Like it's detailed. Like
Right.
because they want the person to they can't get
Yeah.
away. They can't
Right.
get away.
Right.
And so they watch the attack ad, or sometimes it'll just be somebody speaking to the camera and saying something, and it will be the most prejudiced thing ever. And so then they take it back and they say, now where do you see yourself on the scale?
Right.
And the person always moves towards prejudice.
They move to the attack ad works on them.
It works, right?
Right.
And then they say, why did you move? Now, this is the most powerful question ever. Why did you move on the scale? And the person in that moment goes into what they call active processing, the system two thinking, thinking fast and slow stuff.
Yeah.
They move out of automaticity and they move away from signaling and they move away from trying to say what you want to hear. And they actually are like, oh, wait.
So you're actually invoking like a different kind of thought, like a more conscious thought. You're not just sort of looking at your gut and justifying it. You're actually stepping back.
That's it. They're bypassing that justification, the belief whack-a-mole
It's a different
stuff.
system.
That's why they don't engage them to begin with, because that would be belief whack-a-mole.
Right.
So they say, why did you move? And the person will not know because
that's not how it works.
This is the first time they've ever thought. And often I think if any one of us were asked, like, did you like the last Star Wars movie? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put yourself? And you say, and then I ask you, that's the actual the phrase they use. Why is that the right number for you? It's very powerful phrasing. And believe me, that's been tested thousands of times to be the way to say it.
Yeah.
Why is that the right number for you? It requires you to go inside yourself and to get to really investigate, where does this come from? What is the source of this? So what the person ends up saying, whatever they say, that sort of becomes position A, and that's out there now. And this probably is the first time that person's ever said it out loud or thought it or anything. Mm-hmm. And they may even shock themselves. They say it. Now, they call this deep canvassing, by the way. The deep canvasser starts asking them about, this is very important, they look for real lived experiences. They stay as far away from abstractions, as far away from anything that could be considered an argument. And because people can save themselves with abstractions. They can say, well, this person says this. Don't do that. It has to be something from their own personal life, something they really lived, something that has an emotional tag to it. And they will ask them, so how many transgender people do you know? Right. Oftentimes, like, I don't know any. And now that's in their head, they're like, well, I just feel very strongly about this, and I don't even know any. They're saying, but that's private. That's private. They don't go, ha ha. and then they say, when's the first time you ever heard of transgender anything? And then the person, oftentimes, that's when they'll realize it was received wisdom. Maybe they saw, a lot of people are actually in that canvassing, the first time they ever saw it was from a Donahue episode. You guys know what Donahue is?
Donahue, whoa.
Way back in the day, he did, sex change, rah, and they remember that. That like still stuck with them, right?
Wow.
And they realized, oh my God, that was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Like, that's what's making me think this. And privately, they're realizing either their model of reality is incomplete, or it's deeply in need of updating, and they let that happen with them privately. And this becomes position B. And so now what you're entering into is what they call motivational interviewing. Now, they had no idea that's what they were doing, but that's what they're doing.
They keep inventing all these different things, right?
And so what you've created is a strong ambivalence. I could go this way or I could go this way. This is from my real lived experience.
Right.
This is something I just told this person. And they let them feel that cognitive dissonance. They let it get really icky. And they start telling them, well, here are my experiences. Here's what I've experienced. I'm here doing this. This is why this is important to me.
The interviewer does this.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not telling them what to think. They're just sharing. They're just saying, these are my experiences. But they're not saying you should think that. They're just saying, let me tell you some of my experiences.
And then there's this, whatever is the meta thing about it, whereas if it's being othered is often the thing they'll talk about. Like, have you ever had an experience being othered?
Yeah.
Have you ever had an experience where you've...
you felt that?
People, eventually, as soon as a person feels cognitive dissonance this strongly, they want to talk to you. And they have to break away. I mean, they try to break away within 22 minutes, but oftentimes the person will not let them leave. They're like, I need to talk about it.
People want to talk more. Oh my God, someone comes to someone comes to knock on your door to change your mind about a political issue, and you won't let them go away.
This is it.
Right.
And so what happens most of the time is they will resolve. That's the way mind change happens. Mind change is always a choice between conservation of an old model and turning yourself in a sort of right mode for a new model. And we are built as biological organisms to preserve the model so that we can continue operating, and we can't flip in a second because that would make us, we wouldn't be able to navigate anything. And so, but that puts them in that mode, and they will resolve the dissonance in the direction of the new model almost or if it's done properly. If you do everything right. And this takes a lot of training to do properly.
And if you're curious about it, there's videos of this stuff online. It's the Leadership Lab. It's called. There's like they're long, so like we weren't gonna. I think we tried to edit it down for this, but it felt like anything that edited it didn't quite capture it. But if you watch it, you see. One of the things that's really remarkable to me, at least in watching them, is like they are listening, and it's very kind. Like it's very respectful of the people.
Be empathetic.
And it's very
be
empathetic.
Understanding. Meet people as they are.
Why is that the right answer for you? Like even or whatever is that the phrasing? Like that felt like, oh right, that's such an empathetic thing. It's not like why do you think that? Like that feels like an accusation. But like why is that the right answer for you? It feels very like permitting and kind, and it's a question about yourself and what you're like. And even it's not. And even when you give them information, you're not like, oh, I'm trying to persuade you. It's like, well, let me just tell you some things about my experience, which is sort of like generous and kind. You're not trying to. And yet it's this kind of jujitsu where you like then that brings them around.
Steve told me, Steve Dittmann, who was my main trainer, he said, always think this: you're solving a mystery together. You are solving a mystery together.
Oh, I love it. Oh,
that
so nice.
and that is so practical. I've done this with my dad, and it works a lot. If you don't have to use all these techniques in detail. If you can just use that one phrase and put that at the top of your mind. When I talk to this person about this political issue or whatever it is you're debating or you're in disagreement about, if you say, let's solve a mystery together, where I have this, you have this. I bet there's this higher thing that we can get to between us.
So here's the thing about this that I'm super curious about, that we talked about a little bit more, but I'm really curious about, which is when I hear this story, I'm like, that's great. Like I can make homophobic people be not homophobic people. I can make transphobic people be not transphobic. I can make people who oppose abortion rights support abortion rights. I'm like, this is great. This is magic, just through empathy and listening and all this stuff. But then I'm like, does it work the other way?
So I asked that question.
Why doesn't it?
Okay, so I asked, that was one of my big questions at the Fly Show. I was like, I'm worried that you've created the greatest persuasion technique ever invented, and that we're going to be picking it apart for a generation, and this is going to be immediately used by Donald Trump. And like this is going to be like, how is this going? Like, I'm worried that,
or there's some other guy right behind you, just like, and not even flip back and forth all day.
Yeah, right. And it doesn't even have to be, and if that's your politics, that's fine. But it could be used for harm in some other way, right? It could be used for nefarious purposes. And he said it's impossible. He said, and the reason for that, and this actually bears out in the research. People are never as conservative as they think they are when it comes to progressive issues. They actually call it conservatism bias, and this was revealed in the '60s when they would go from town to town and ask people, how they felt, and everybody always most strongly anti-progressive notions are born out of something called pluralistic ignorance, where everyone thinks that everyone else thinks one way, but they're the only person who disagrees with it, and that they're the naysayer in their community. But so like during desegregation, they would go home to home and they would say, this is in the '60s, they would say, so how do you feel about, they might desegregate your schools. What do you think about that? And they would say, well, I'm all for it, but my neighbors are really racist. And then they go to their neighbor, and they ask the neighbor, like, well, I'm all for it, but my neighbor's really racist. And they would go over and they'd be like, this whole town is totally is for this. They're ready for it, but they all think that they're the only people home to home that feels it. And he said that a lot of times, when it's for a progressive issue like that, he said that you can't use this technique to get people to go in that direction, because you will when you resolve your dissonance, it's in the direction of being less of an asshole. It's in the direction of being people resolve dissonance in the direction of empathy. They will do it. And
I have such mixed feelings about that, because pardon me, as someone with progressive politics and liberal politics, I'm like, yes, that's awesome. As someone who's sort of committed to the idea that everybody's points of view are biased and something like that. There's something about that like rings weird for me. Like, oh, here's this special way to change people's minds that works for changing people's minds to points of view like my own, but not points of view different from my own, by like pretending we're solving a mystery where the mystery is I'm right. Like, that's a weird. There's something weird to me about it, right?
I think, in a lot of ways, what they're revealing to the person is their eagerness for change was already inside them. That's really what it is.
Right. So it's for a very specific set of things. It's like if you can identify something, so it's like a really specific thing. If you can identify a social issue where sort of you really feel like, in 15 years everyone's going to think this way, or this is the more progressive view or something like that, then you can kind of accelerate it or tip it or something like that. But you can't use it. You can't use it for everything. Maybe that's good news for you. Maybe it's disappointing if you were hoping to use it. Those of you who came for general mind control tips will be disappointed. Those of you looking for progressive social change will be happy. And I assume it's a mix.
And they are having a hard time with abortion rights. Like they're trying, because they realize early on, or not early on, they realize lately.
Yeah, that's a good example.
That it has to be tweaked per issue. Things that were working really well for LGBT issues, they have found this is being used for climate change and all sorts of other stuff right now. It's being used all over the country. Their brigade, it's not just in LA anymore. It's all over the United States. They have people doing this in a lot of different universities. And they realize it has to be tweaked per issue because they don't know exactly what it is that would create ambivalence. Because that's one of the things that they had to bypass was this is not about belief. Because beliefs and attitudes are not the same mental constructs.
So beliefs and attitudes are what? Beliefs are like things about facts, and attitudes are like things about values?
We're joining a 2,000-year debate on this.
I think we can settle it tonight.
Belief, from a neuroscientist would tell you, belief is information encoded in the brain plus the process of estimating confidence. And so you have, nothing's black or white, nothing's 1 or a 0, it's a percentage of confidence, and that's a belief, right? That's the difference. You can know things about Harry Potter and know they're not true, and that's because you have a 0% confidence in the belief of it. So that's a belief. But an attitude is a valent along a spectrum of what is your gut feeling whenever I say, key lime pie, and you're like, oh, I like key lime pie. You have a positive attitude. What is your, what's your opinion on? So
it's like this thing is good or bad, as opposed to like this empirical, observable.
And
fact.
they build on top of each other to become values because so we know what's good or bad for the group and that sort of thing. And that early on, the Leadership Lab was making that mistake, and it's a very old mistake. The first researchers to study persuasion really thought that everything was a belief. In fact, the words were interchangeable: belief, opinion, attitude, value. Right. They would use them back and forth, and the books were hard to read. I've read them; they're hard to read because they don't make any. Because
they make no sense to a modern reader, where you're like, they're just conflating these different levels of
one paragraph they're talking about opinions, the next one they're talking about beliefs, the next one attitudes. They didn't realize that these were different mental constructs with different rules to them.
People were dumb.
Yeah. There's a long story as to how they figured all that out. It's great. But the Leadership Lab, like everything else, they relearned all that. And so that they're doing attitudes, and attitudes are going to be valent all the way over here, or valent all the way over here, and ambivalent in the middle. And if you can, in one conversation, you can pull somebody to an extreme and over into ambivalence, or you can take somebody from ambivalence and move them a little bit toward an extreme. Right. And so a lot of what they do is they go out into neighborhoods where they think people might already be ambivalent, so it's easier to change their minds because you're pulling them over there. If they do just happen to pull somebody out of strongly one way just to ambivalence, that's still a success to them because that you put them on the path to later on in life, they might move down the line a little bit. So they don't get upset if they don't just flip somebody. Cool. Making somebody ambivalent is good enough.
That's exciting. It's like so much stuff. The book has got like 1 billion ideas in it. Like it's not. I haven't. It's not out yet, and I'm legally forbidden from reading it. But David's like given me like some outlines of it and stuff. And one of the things about the book is it's not one of these books where like there's kind of this one idea and they just kind of
that's just one technique.
It's like one technique. And it's like so the book is. It's so incredibly packed with different ideas. The book's not coming out for like maybe a year, so you can't like run out and buy it now. But what you can do is that David's podcast and blog are there, and you're going to be sort of talking more about all this stuff and all those things. So if you want to learn more about it, it's You Are Not So Smart. You should subscribe to the podcast and follow the blog and check out all those things. Follow him on Twitter.
And get on the Facebook page or something, and I will definitely tell you when it comes
Facebook,
out.
Instagram. It's going to be on Instagram. It's going to be on everything. It's going to be. He's going to tell you everything all the time. Let's take a bit of time for a couple of questions before we wrap up. You over there. Yeah.
What's your thoughts on the so-called cultural wars that are happening on campus?
What about the so-called culture wars on campus? And sorry.
The role that Toronto Dome's Jordan Peterson is playing in
And Jordan Peterson's, Toronto's Jordan Peterson. What do you think about Toronto's?
Oh my God.
It's a good to have a Toronto question. Thank you. Local hero Jordan Peterson.
Oh my God. I did not know I'd have to start beef with Jordan Peterson. A lot of the I've asked this question. I thought about doing a show about it, and I didn't because most of the people I talked to who work in social sciences were like, it's not that big a deal. That's what they were telling me. I know that like Peterson wouldn't tell you that. Jonathan Haidt wouldn't tell you that. I mean, Jonathan Haidt has a book coming out about it. It's coming out soon, where he's like, these damn kids is what it should be called. I think it's a blip in the cultural moment. This is just people trying to develop a vocabulary for a very new tool. In the beginning, it's easy. People are going to use a tool for what it's for. You can't fix a car with an axe, but you can cut a tree down with it. And social media, as it is currently, the context right now is very good for shaming. It's very good for dogpiling. And if that's the tool, that's what you use it for. And so you'll see more examples of that being what people do with it, because that's what it's good for. And I think we already are seeing people using it better. The Parkland kids are showing us how to properly use social media. Go back 5 years and people were using it improperly, and they were causing more harm than good in a lot of instances, not every instance. So I think it's people who are in a specific world, and they probably have very legitimate complaints in that world, but I don't think it bleeds out into our
Do you mean
lives.
like Jordan Peterson?
I think he's got some good points, but I also think he puts them out in a way that he shoots himself in the foot a lot.
Right,
Yeah.
so some of the underlying stuff seems not crazy, but the way that it gets presented becomes inflammatory in a way that social media sort of exacerbates.
Oh yeah, of course.
Right, so all this stuff becomes kind of flame wars or flame
Am I
wars. That's
answering
like a
your question, or
70s
saying-
term. I
Am I
think.
answering my own question?
Does that sort of get at your question, or is
I
that?
guess another question is, do you think there's a war on free speech?
Do you think there's a war on free speech? No. The answer is no.
No.
Any other questions? Yes, over there. Yes, back there. Yes, you, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah.
You talk a lot about shifting from one opinion to another opinion, but I wonder if there's a place in your body of work, I don't know, if that's from no opinion to.
What about going from
That's
no
great.
opinion to some opinion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good you asked that. There's in political science, there's actually a term called non-opinions, and they discovered, that's why it's very important that we define each of these terms accurately. An opinion, as the way I'm defining it in the book, it's a snapshot of the whole system, right? So it's your attitudes, your beliefs, your values, and you can throw in all the norms you follow, and it's just a snapshot in that exact second of what is salient to you. And we now know that through a lot of social science work that if you go to the same person's door 7 days in a row, you will get 7 different opinions, because it depends on what's salient to them in the moment. Because we don't have access to all the mental constructs that are moving around in our minds, the conversations we've had, the things we've been reading, the things we've been talking about, the things we've been watching, will make certain things salient. And then when I ask your opinion about a topic, you'll be based off the salience. And so they actually have a sort of an algorithm they use where they form sort of a bell curve of opinion, because every time somebody responds, they don't take it as that's what they believe. And they will find sort of statistically where they seem to be, and that's what they say is their true opinion. And so they call it non-opinions. When someone, they actually, as a study, and I have it in the book, where they just make up issues that aren't actually happening in the news, and they ask them how they feel about it, and people will be like, I vehemently feel about, like cake should be legal. And they're like, it's not even an issue, but people will say they have a strong opinion about it, and they say that shows that it's more about the way that you're asking is what's generating the response. So we all feel like we have deeply ruminated on every single topic, and we have a very strong, that's part of what the Leadership Lab does, is they often reveal to the person, I've never really thought about this.
Right, and that seems like that they haven't thought about it. One thing we talked about earlier was the idea that people think they have an opinion, but they actually don't.
Yeah.
Among the millions of things, it's crazy all the things that we're wrong about. The one thing that we can be wrong about is we think I'm really certain about something,
That's it,
but
yeah.
it turns out you're actually not.
They
So
call it
even,
a meta-belief.
even your certainty about your certainty is misplaced. It's crazy how messed
They
up.
call it a meta-belief. I have a belief
we are.
that I have a belief.
Yeah, and even that's wrong. We just can't win. Yeah, was there more?
Yeah, no, it's just like how to get people engaged around.
I see. So you want to be how to get people. So the reason you ask is you're like I'm sick of all these people who are like. Is this like a political motivated kind of thing? Is that the?
Sure, I talk to a lot of people who are like, meh.
Right. I just don't care about these issues, and the question is how to make them care.
Yeah. Well, the Leadership Lab, one of the phenomena that is embedded in what they do. I didn't even get into it. It's very, I could talk about that forever because there's so much that goes into what they do.
Yeah.
It's called the elaboration likelihood model. Is that something anybody's ever heard of?
Elaboration likelihood model?
Yeah.
That's probably one or two people who haven't, so maybe just explain.
So, that's something that was discovered when they were the giant corpus of data that was collected by the Yale Attitude Lab for those 70 years. It showed that this technique works in this environment, and this speaker is effective in this group, but won't be in this group.
Yeah.
And it was just chaos. It was like there's all this information, but there's no way to unify it. And Petty and Cassioppo, two grad students, they rented a house, and they tore out a wall, and they painted a whole side of the house with blackboard paint, and they put up every single study that had a definite result in attitudes research, and they just kept writing it and rewriting it and erasing it until they figured out until they get so far away from it that they could see the pattern, and they developed what's called the elaboration likelihood model, and that's the you've probably heard of the peripheral route versus the central route.
You've heard of the peripheral route versus the central route. Come on, guys.
Why? Oh my God.
So I'll very quickly say what that is. That's okay. You're driving up. You're about to drive through Argument City, and you could go around the city or you could go straight through the city. If you go straight through the city, the central route, you will see all the people walking around, and you'll see all the shops, and you'll smell the food and whatever else you'll smell, and you'll get a real sense of place, and you'll actually have all this granular detail about the thing. Now, okay, and if you take the peripheral route, you'll see the skyline and the billboards and all that stuff, and you'll have a very sort of broad, basic, simple idea of it. So that's also true when it comes to argumentation. You can take the central route or the peripheral route, and if you take the central route, you're going to be talking about logic and details and evidence and expertise. And the peripheral route would be like, that person's a good speaker, that person smells nice, that person looked me in the eyes, right? But all that's very powerful. That can be very persuasive. Those are important persuasive techniques. So the research showed that this is mitigated, or this is titrated by two factors: your capacity, your cognitive load, and your motivation. So one of the landmark studies, they had students at a university. They said, they told them, they lied to them. They said, this university is going to instate a comprehensive exam for you to graduate, and they're going to do it this year. And they told another group of students at the university they're going to institute a comprehensive exam in 7 years. So now they've introduced motivation,
right.
And then they would manipulate them by having noises be playing, or they'd give them food or not give them food. That would adjust their cognitive load, and they found that because you've put this group on the central route, you've put this group on the peripheral route. Now you give them arguments, and they design.
So the central route is the 1 year? Is that the?
Yeah.
So the 1 year is this is going to happen to you.
Yeah.
And 7 years is this is an abstract thing. You could just think about it. It would definitely affect you.
Because they've interactive processing.
Right,
They're
right.
let me think about this. And then they found that you could give, if you gave this one group, they gave them strong and weak arguments. And so they could give the central route one strong argument and 3 weak arguments, and they would believe the strong argument. They would be more likely to take the strong argument, and that would persuade them. But the peripheral route would be more likely to take the weak arguments, just because there were more of them, because they were using peripheral cues.
They were just counting pros and cons.
Those are
all crappy arguments.
No, they were just counting the number of arguments.
Just that's
3 arguments.
Right.
And so if you
there's 3 things in favor of
There's
this.
3
It's
things.
a good idea.
So they learned that if you properly put someone on the central route and then you deliver strong arguments, they're more likely to be persuaded by the strong arguments, and they're more likely to stick. If you put them on the peripheral route, they're much more likely to be persuaded by peripheral cues, which are easier to pull off, but it won't stick. Why is that important? Because if you're running a political campaign, you should take the peripheral route, because you only want them to vote. It doesn't matter what happens after. If you want to change the world, you need to use the central route, because that'll make it stick. It's a lot harder, but it depends on what you're going for, what your goal is.
So that's the choice that you have to make for yourself, and the choice that we all have to make. I think maybe, I think what I'll do is, I think that's the time that you have. There's so much more. There's so much more in the book, and so once again, I really encourage you, buy the book when it comes out. That's still 1 year. That's still central route. Buy the book when it comes out. But in the meantime, even more central, buy David's past books, which are up there. Listen to the podcast.
Yeah, it's just You're Not So Smart.
Read the blog. Follow him on Facebook. There are all those amazing things. David's going to stick around for a while and sign books, so we're going to do that. I want to just thank a bunch of people who worked on this show. It's so amazing to me that we even got David here to come to this, and that would not have happened without the incredible help of Kian Cruz and Kate Bars. So I want to thank them. I want to thank Sheila Hetty and Margot Williamson, who both helped me tremendously in putting this thing together. Mostly, I want to thank David McRaney for coming out tonight. Thanks so much, David. That was amazing.
Thank you.
David will be out in the back signing books, and I'll see the rest of you soon. Oh, and if you want to know more about events like these, sign up for the email list in the back. Sign up for that, and I'll let you know the next time one of these is happening.